He should be in a nursing home, my son said on my birthday. A week later, my secretary answered the door, and she knew exactly what to do. My name is Walter. I turned 71 last Tuesday, and for the first time in my life, I wished I hadn't. Not because of the number. I've never been one to chase youth. But because of what I heard on what was supposed to be my day. It was a small family gathering. My son, David, insisted we keep it simple this year. No restaurant, no friends, just close family. You're not a kid anymore, Dad, he said, half laughing as he handed me a cake from the grocery store. No candles, just one of those plastic number toppers. A crooked 7 next to a chipped one. I told myself not to mind. At this age, you learn to lower expectations. But something fell off the entire night. The way my daughter-in-law barely looked up from her phone. The way my grandson asked 3 times if we were done yet. Even the dog, my dog, by the way, which I paid for, kept circling David like he was the king of the castle now. After dinner, I got up to get the bottle of scotch I'd been saving for a special occasion. Maybe this wasn't one, but it was what I had. As I walked down the hallway, I heard them in the kitchen. I wasn't eavesdropping, not on purpose. The door was half open, the walls thin, and then I heard it, so clearly it might as well have been shouted. He should be in a home by now. David's voice. Sharp, certain. My hand froze on the cabinet. I didn't move. Maybe part of me hoped I'd misunderstood. But then she, his wife, added, honestly, I don't know why he still lives here. He just takes up space. It's like walking on eggshells around him. David laughed. Trust me, I've looked into it. He's got assets. If he goes into a facility, we could repurpose the house. Maybe flip it. Or rent it out. It's in a great neighborhood. Repurpose. That's what I was to them. Something to be cleared out and turned into profit. I backed away quietly, bottle forgotten. My knees felt hollow. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the floor, not sure if I wanted to cry or laugh or scream. But I did none of those things. I just sat. For a long time. You raise a child thinking they're part of you. Like your love, your values, your sacrifices somehow live on inside them. I worked my whole life, 50 years on the same job site, roof after roof, rain or shine. I paid off this house. I put food on every table. I paid for David's college. I walked him down the aisle. I held his son the day he was born, and now I was a burden. Maybe you've been there too. That quiet moment when you realize you've outlived your usefulness in someone else's story. You're no longer the hero. You're the background, the inconvenience. I didn't confront them. What would have been the point? They'd deny it. Laugh it off. Dad, you're overthinking. It was just a joke. Or worse, they'd admit it. Just own it. And I wasn't ready for that. Instead, I poured a glass of water, sat at the kitchen table when they returned, pretending nothing happened. David patted me on the back. Good birthday, huh? I nodded, smiled, lied, but something shifted that night. Subtle but deep, like a crack in the foundation. Not enough to make the house fall, but enough to make you start packing boxes in your mind. I didn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan. I remembered things I hadn't thought of in years. David as a little boy, running barefoot across the lawn. His first baseball game. The time he broke his arm and wouldn't stop crying until I carried him out of the ER like a superhero. Where had that boy gone? By morning, I'd made a decision. No rage, no revenge. Just clarity. If they already thought I was gone, maybe it was time I really went. But not the way they imagined. I wouldn't disappear into a corner room of some sad little facility. I wouldn't rot away under flickering fluorescent lights while strangers forgot my name. No, if I was going to fade out of their world, I'd do it on my own terms. Quietly, deliberately, like a man setting down his tools for the last time and choosing which door to walk through next. But first, I needed a plan. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. It's a habit I never unlearned, even after retirement. There's something about the stillness of those early hours that makes you feel like the world hasn't turned its back on you yet. Like maybe, for a few moments, you could pretend everything's okay. I moved through the kitchen like I always did. Coffee, 2 scoops, kettle just shy of boiling. I reached for the old mug with the chipped rim, the one David made in elementary school. It's hideous, lopsided, brown with awkward blue handprints, and the words #OneDad scratched into the side. I've kept it all these years. Not because it's pretty, but because it meant something once. I sat at the table, wrapped both hands around that mug like I was holding on to something solid. And I drank. But that coffee, God, it tasted different. Bitter. Maybe it was just a roast. Or maybe when your heart breaks, even water tastes like regret. I told myself I'd imagined it. That what I heard the night before was taken out of context. But deep down, I knew better. You don't mistake a sentence like that. You don't mishear a plan to remove you from your own life. I thought about David's childhood. The scraped knees, the science fairs, the countless nights I stayed up helping him study. I thought about the time I sold my old pickup so he could go on the senior class trip to D.C. He never knew that. I just told him the truck had finally died. He was a bright kid, curious, talkative. He used to follow me around the house asking questions about everything. Why birds fly in V shapes, how the thermostat works, what happens when people die. He used to grab my hand without thinking. He used to climb into bed when he had nightmares. I was his safe place. And now I was what? A liability? An obstacle between him and a future he didn't think included me? Maybe you know what that feels like. To watch someone you love shift right in front of you. Like a picture that slowly fades until only the outline is left. You try to touch it, but there's nothing to hold on to. Just memories. Just echoes. I took another sip. Still bitter. I'd spent my whole life believing that loyalty was enough. That if you give everything, they'll give something back. But love, real love, isn't a transaction. And maybe that's the cruelest lesson of old age. Realizing that what you gave so freely can be forgotten so easily. He didn't mean to hurt me. That's the part that stung the most. David didn't say those words in anger. He said them casually, strategically, like a businessman talking numbers. Like I was a piece on a board, a cost to be reduced. I'd always hoped he'd see me as a man to admire, someone he could be proud of. But maybe I raised him to value results, not roots. Maybe I taught him how to succeed, but not how to remember who helped him get there. I looked around the kitchen. Same cabinets I installed 30 years ago. Same clock ticking on the wall. Same window that led in the same morning light. But everything felt unfamiliar. Like I was visiting a version of my life that didn't belong to me anymore. The dog curled up by the door, wagging his tail half-heartedly when I glanced at him. He was the only one in the house who looked at me the same way. No calculation, no agenda, just eyes that still recognized me. I stood up, walked to the hallway, and paused in front of David's room. He was still asleep, door cracked open, just like when he was a boy. I used to peek in on him every night, make sure he was breathing, kiss his forehead if he'd had a rough day. Sometimes I'd just stand there, hand on the doorknob, whispering prayers I didn't even realize I believed in. Now I stood there again, older, heavier, tired in a way I didn't know how to name. I didn't hate him. I want you to understand that. There wasn't rage in me, just a kind of quiet ache, like a bruise you keep pressing to see if it still hurts. And it did. I turned away, went back to the kitchen, poured the rest of the coffee down the sink. If I was going to keep waking up, I needed a different kind of morning. That day, I went to the garage, dusted off some boxes I hadn't opened in years. Letters, photos, an old blueprint of the first house I ever built. It reminded me who I was before all this, before being someone's father to find me, so completely that I forgot I had my own name. I found my old journal tucked between some tax forms and rusted tools. The leather was worn, pages yellowed, but it was mine. I flipped through it and stopped a line I'd written decades ago, right after David was born. May he grow into a man who loves deeply, even when the world teaches him to value things more than people. I closed the book, sat back, and something inside me began to settle. Not peace exactly, but intention. They thought I was too old to matter. But I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. 2 days after the birthday, I found myself at the back of my closet, reaching for an old coat I hadn't worn in years. Not because it was cold, but because, tucked inside its inner pocket, was a business card I hadn't touched in over a decade. The ink had faded a little, but the name was still there. Richard L. McAllister, Estate and Family Law. Richard and I go way back. We build our lives side by side. Him in a courtroom, me on rooftops. He handled the legal side of things when my wife passed. Quiet man, sharp mind. The kind of lawyer who still looked you in the eye and asked how you were doing, even if he charged you for the hour. I didn't call ahead, just showed up. His office hadn't changed much. Same dark wood furniture, same ticking wall clock, same framed newspaper clipping from when he won that messy farm inheritance case back in '92. He looked older, thinner hair, slower gait, but his eyes were still alert, the kind that noticed more than you said. "Walter," he said, rising slowly, as if surprised I was still around. "Haven't seen you in a long time. Sit down. What brings you in?" I sat, not because I needed to rest, but because I needed to think carefully about what came next. "I need to make changes," I told him. "To the will. To everything." He raised an eyebrow. Something happened. I hesitated. Then I shook my head. Nothing sudden. Just time catching up. He nodded like he understood, but I could tell he didn't buy it completely. He'd known me long enough to recognize when I was guarding something. "We got to work." Over the next hour, we went through every document, property titles, account beneficiaries, healthcare proxies. Richard asked questions. I gave short answers. I wasn't ready to say out loud what I'd heard in my own kitchen. Maybe some truths are too ugly to speak before they're fully processed. But inside, I knew what I was doing. For years, I'd left everything in David's name. It was what you do, right? You trust your children. You pass things on. You prepare for the day when you're no longer here to hold it all together. But something about hearing those words, "he should be in a home," ripped that trust wide open. They didn't want me here. They just wanted what was mine. So I began to rewrite the script. I asked Richard to create a trust, one with strict conditions. I didn't want David touching anything unless he earned it. And I didn't mean with charm or manipulation. I meant with character, with action. And if he couldn't meet those terms, well, then everything would go elsewhere. To a cause, a foundation, maybe even to people who remembered what gratitude looked like. Richard glanced at me mid-sentence. "You sure you want to go through with all this?" I met his eyes. I've never been more sure of anything. Because this wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about punishing David. It was about reclaiming what little control I had left before they boxed me into a room somewhere and sold off the pieces of my life like old furniture. We went over the documents line by line. I changed power of attorney, updated emergency contacts, removed names, added new ones. I even gave temporary authority to someone they didn't even know existed. My assistant from the community center, a young woman named Clara, who'd helped me organize charity donations for years. She was trustworthy, humble, quiet, but sharp. "Clara will oversee the estate if anything happens to me," I said. Richard looked impressed. "You've been thinking about this a while, haven't you?" "Longer than I wanted to," I said. When the last paper was signed, Richard slid the pen back into its case and leaned back. "You know this won't go over well." "I'm not doing this for applause," I replied. "I'm doing it because they stopped seeing me as a man." I stood up, feeling the weight of what I'd just done settle into my bones. It wasn't fear. It was relief. Like loosening a belt after carrying too much. Outside, the sky was overcast. Gray but not gloomy. The kind of day that asks nothing of you. Just lets you be. I drove home slowly. No music. Just the sound of the road and my own breathing. When I got back, David was in the living room, watching a financial podcast on his laptop, headphones on, completely lost in someone else's voice. I walked past him like a ghost, and he didn't even look up. And I realized that's what I was to him now. A ghost. But ghosts, as you know, sometimes come back with unfinished business. There's a small door behind the old bookshelf in my study. Most people who visit never notice it. It blends in with the wood paneling. Just another shadow in a room full of forgotten things. But behind that door, there's a wall safe. Nothing fancy, just steel and silence, bolted into brick. I installed it myself nearly 40 years ago, back when I still believed in locks more than lawyers. I hadn't opened it in over a decade. It took me a moment to remember the combination, my wedding anniversary. Same code as always. My hands hesitated on the dial longer than they should have. Not because I forgot, but because remembering it still hurts. When the safe creaked open, a musty draft came out with it. Inside, papers. Dozens of them, neatly stacked. Rubber bands turned brittle. Envelopes yellowed around the edges. A whole lifetime filed away in silence. I sat down with it all. No fanfare. No plan. Just the weight of old decisions, asking to be remembered. The first thing I pulled out was a letter from my wife. Handwritten. Curved script. She had beautiful penmanship, the kind that makes you slow down just to appreciate the shape of every word. It was dated 2 weeks before David was born. "If anything happens to me," she wrote, "don't raise him to owe you. Raise him to respect you." I ran my thumb over that line until the ink felt warm again. I found the original deed to the house. A stack of promissory notes from friends I'd loaned money to and never asked back. A copy of my first will. The one where everything went to David without question, because back then, it felt like the only thing that made sense. That was the version of me who still believed blood guaranteed loyalty. But this was a different season. A different man. I took out a manila envelope labeled Baldwin Company. Ownership documents. That was my business. Roofing and repairs. Now a small property development company. Not huge, but solid. Steady. Honest work. I'd been preparing David to take over since his 20s, but he never wanted to touch it. Said manual labor was beneath him. He was into tech startups and scaling assets, whatever that means. He never built anything with his hands. Never even held a hammer right. But he always assumed the business would be his someday. I looked at the ownership forms and then looked past them. I grabbed a blank sheet of paper and began drawing something new, a holding structure. Clara's name at the top as managing director. Independent oversight. Quarterly charitable distributions. Employee first protocols. A legacy not driven by blood, but by integrity. Clara had been with me for nearly 5 years. She started as an assistant, answering phones at the nonprofit where I volunteered. But she had that rare mix, compassion and grit. The kind of person who made you feel like your words mattered. I began pulling her into small tasks for the company, then bigger ones. And eventually, without realizing it, I started trusting her with more than I ever trusted my own son. I called her that afternoon. Clara, I said, how would you feel about stepping into a bigger role? She hesitated. I'm not sure I understand. You will, I told her. I've got some papers I'd like you to look at, and a future I need help protecting. There was a pause. Then she said quietly, I'm honored, Mr. Wallace. It had been a long time since someone said that to me without needing something in return. I spent the rest of the day sorting every document. I labeled, I indexed, I wrote letters to go with each folder, notes explaining what I wanted, why I was making the changes, and who could be trusted if anything ever went wrong. It wasn't paranoia. It was preparation. You don't wait until you're powerless to start defending what matters. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like a burden. I felt like a man again. David came home late that night. I heard his car pull in, music loud, doors slamming. He passed by the study without even glancing in. It used to be our space. He'd sit on the floor with Legos while I paid bills. He used to ask what everything meant, how mortgages worked, what insurance did, why I kept papers in boxes. He doesn't ask anymore. Maybe he thinks he already knows. But knowing and earning are two different things. And the man who built this house brick by brick is done handing out blueprints to people who never planned to build. They thought I was disappearing, fading out, like old wallpaper no one bothers to strip because eventually it just peels off on its own. I could see it in the way they spoke around me, not to me, in the way they'd say, he's probably just resting, or he doesn't like to go out anymore, as if I were some houseplant on the windowsill, quiet, low maintenance, and easy to ignore. Let them think that. While they whispered about how tired I seemed, I was driving 2 towns over in a borrowed pickup truck. A small place, population barely scraping 4 digits. 1 main street, 3 traffic lights, and a view of the hills that made you forget the noise of everything you left behind. It wasn't far enough to lose myself completely, but far enough that no one knew my name unless I told them. I found a little storefront on a side street. Brick facade, old wood-framed windows, a bell on the door that jingled every time you walked in. It used to be a tailor's shop, long abandoned. Dust coated everything. The floor creaked like it had secrets to tell, but it had good bones. I knew the feeling. I bought under a new LLC. Quiet paperwork, quiet transfer. Clara handled the filings. I didn't tell her what it was for. Not yet. I just said, this is something I want to do for myself. And for once, no one questioned me. The first thing I brought into the space was a canvas. Not a chair, not a broom. A canvas. I hadn't painted in over 30 years. I used to sketch rooftops, outlines of houses, cityscapes from my truck during lunch breaks. It wasn't art back then. It was release. Something private. Something mine. The brushes felt foreign in my hand at first, like I was holding someone else's memory. But the motion came back. Line by line. Shade by shade. I wasn't painting for anyone. No audience. No critique. Just color, shape, silence. I started going there every day. I pretend to go on walks. Sometimes I leave the house before sunrise, coffee in a thermos, change of clothes in the back seat. David didn't ask. He just assumed I was running errands, or that I'd forgotten why I left in the first place. It was funny, really, how easy it is to vanish in plain sight. Within a few weeks, the space had taken shape. I cleaned out the back room, patched up the drywall, installed new lights. I turned the front into a small gallery. Not a fancy one, not the kind with white wine and whispered critiques. Just open walls, quiet music, and a sign that read, "For those who remember how to feel." I met people, strangers who walked in and stayed longer than they planned. A young teacher who bought a piece for her classroom. An old man who cried in front of a painting of a red umbrella in the rain. No one knew my last name. No one asked what I used to be. And for once, I didn't have to explain myself. I wasn't the man in the way. I wasn't the old father eating quietly at the end of the table. I was Walter, the one who painted in the back and didn't mind the quiet. Sometimes I'd sit near the window and watch people walk by. I'd wonder how many of them had also been written off. How many were just waiting for someone to see them again. And slowly, I began to feel something I hadn't in a long time. Lightness. Not happiness, not quite, but the kind of peace that comes when you stop trying to be what others need and finally become who you are again. Back at home, David assumed I was just slowing down. He took it as permission to fill the space. I let him believe I was retreating. He started handling calls for the business more boldly, started answering questions I hadn't asked. He once even said to a client, "Don't worry, my father's stepping back. He trusts me to take it from here." He had no idea I'd already stepped forward somewhere else. There's something beautiful about building a life no one sees coming. Something satisfying about growing in the shadow of their expectations. Let them talk. Let them plan. Let them think I was fading. They missed the best part. While they were busy overlooking me, I was throwing a party no one knew they weren't invited to. A celebration of quiet freedom, of dignity reclaimed, of choosing myself after a lifetime of being chosen last. And in the center of it all, behind the gallery wall, was a single canvas I never displayed. It was a portrait of a man looking out a window, hand on the glass, light on his face. Eyes not tired, but waiting. Not broken, but aware. It was me, and I wasn't going anywhere. David always thought he was ready, that he could walk into any room, speak with confidence, throw around a few buzzwords, and the world would nod in agreement. For a while it worked. He had the voice, the looks, the charm. But charm doesn't fix broken contracts. Confidence doesn't balance ledgers. And legacy, well, legacy doesn't pass itself on just because you expect it to. It started quietly. A bounce payment to a supplier. Nothing major. Just a delay, he told them. Bank's processing update, he said. It'll clear tomorrow. But tomorrow came, and the funds are still locked. Then the payroll system flagged. Clara called me that day. Not in panic, but in that calm, steady voice she always used when storms were coming. "David's been trying to access the main account," she said. "Twice today. Should I freeze his permissions?" I paused for a second, not because I was unsure, but because I felt the full weight of the moment. This was it. The moment he realized the door he assumed would always be open was locked. "Yes," I told her. "He doesn't need access." By the third day, I could see it in his posture. The way he sat at the kitchen table, phone pressed to his ear, voice a little sharper than usual. "What do you mean the property's not under my name?" he snapped. "That's impossible. My father. He said everything was mine." I watched from the hallway, silent, like I had done the night of my birthday. Only this time, I wasn't the one breaking. He started blaming people. First the bank, then the accountant, then Clara. "She's manipulating him," he told my daughter-in-law. "She's the one pulling the strings. She's after the company. I know it." But deep down he knew. This wasn't sabotage. It was consequence. The next week was chaos. Clients pulled out. The team didn't know who was in charge. Clara kept the essentials running, but David kept showing up, giving orders, making calls, tried to fix a ship he didn't know how to sail. He tried to move funds. The bank rejected the transfer. He tried to sell equipment. The ownership papers didn't list his name. He tried to intimidate Clara. She smiled and handed him a copy of the trust. "No decisions can be made without my co-signature," she said, "per the instructions of Mr. Wallace." That's when it happened. That's when the silence broke. He drove home like a storm, slammed the door so hard the frames rattled, and for the first time in months, he looked me in the eyes, not with politeness, not with manipulation, with fury. "What did you do?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. I was sitting on the porch, watering the plants, the same ones his mother used to tend. They were still alive, fragile but alive. "Dad," he said again, "what did you do with the company?" I set the watering can down slowly, looked at him the way you look at someone who still thinks they're holding the leash, when in fact, the dog has already run off. "I protected it," I said. He scoffed. "From who?" "Me." "No," I said. "From what you've become." He paced, muttering to himself, tossing his hands in the air like that would summon a solution. "You can't do this. I'm your son." And there it was. That card. The one he'd kept hidden in his pocket all this time, thinking it trumped everything. "Blood." "I know," I said. "That's why I gave you so many chances." He stared at me, like he didn't recognize the man in front of him. And maybe he didn't. Maybe for the first time, he was seeing me not as the aging figure who sat quietly in the corner, but as the man who built everything he took for granted. "You lied to me," he said finally. "No," I replied. "I just stopped telling you what you expected to hear." He didn't have a response for that. Just stood there, shoulders tense, eyes darting like he was looking for something to break. But there was nothing left for him to shatter. I'd already moved the pieces, already rebuilt it all where he couldn't reach. Later that night, I sat alone in the gallery. The lights were off, the front door locked. Just me and the quiet hum of the world I chose to create. I picked up a brush, dipped it into dark blue, and began painting the outline of a falling tower. Not to mock him, not to celebrate, but because sometimes, when things collapse, you need to remember what the pieces looked like, so you never build the same structure again. The knock came mid-morning. Sharp, repetitive, the kind of knock that carries urgency, or maybe desperation, like someone hoping if they knock hard enough, the answers might come faster. Clara didn't flinch. She had been expecting it. The old house wasn't mine anymore, not technically. I'd moved most of my things out weeks before, what little I wanted to keep, at least. But I'd left it staged for this moment. Like a quiet stage set for a performance no one realized had already started. David stood on the porch. His tie was crooked, hair unkempt, eyes red. Not from tears, but from sleepless nights and frustration. He was still holding a folder under his arm, papers bent, his phone pressed tight in the other hand. Always holding something. Always ready to present, argue, prove. Clara opened the door, calm as ever. She wore a simple blouse, clean lines, her posture straight, but not stiff. She had a presence that made people pause, not because she was loud, but because she didn't need to be. "Can I help you?" she asked, as if she didn't know exactly who he was. David blinked, taken aback. "Where's my father?" Clara tilted her head slightly, like someone checking a calendar in her mind. "He's not here at the moment." He stepped forward, trying to see past her. "Is he coming back soon?" "I'm not sure," she said, her tone neutral, perfectly measured. "Would you like to leave a message?" He stared at her for a long moment, like he was waiting for her to crack, to break character. But this wasn't an act for Clara. She wasn't performing. She was simply in control. "Who are you?" he finally asked. "I'm Mr. Wallace's personal executive," she said. "I help manage his affairs." David laughed once, short, sharp, bitter. "His affairs? Since when does he need an executive?" Clara didn't blink. "Since he decided to protect what he's built." You could almost see the words hit him. He tried to push past her, but she didn't move. And somehow, without lifting a hand, she made it very clear. That threshold would not be crossed. "Not today. You don't get to do this," he said, voice rising. "He's my father." Clara didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. And yet, here you are, asking a stranger where he went. That stopped him. He looked around, as if the house might somehow speak for me, as if the walls might open and explain everything he couldn't understand. The porch creaked under his weight. The wind moved the leaves. But nothing answered him. "You don't know what you're doing," he muttered. Clara finally smiled. It was small, not cruel, just sad. "I think that's the difference between us," she said. "I do." He looked down at the folder in his hand. His last plan, probably. Some attempt to reverse the damage, to call in favors, to reclaim something he never really held. And for a second, I think he realized what was actually happening. It wasn't just about the company anymore. It was about the fact that his father had stopped chasing his approval, had stopped giving him keys to doors he didn't earn, had stopped shrinking himself just to keep the peace. "Tell him I came by," he said finally. Clara nodded. "Of course." But we both knew I already knew. When she closed the door, she didn't lock it. She didn't need to. The message had been delivered. Later that day, Clara called me, just like we'd planned. "He came," she said. I was sitting in the gallery at the time, brush in hand, painting the outline of a door left ajar. "Did you tell him anything?" I asked. "Only what mattered." I smiled. There's a power in letting silence say what words never could. David had built a story in his mind for years. One where he was the inevitable heir, the natural leader, the chosen one. But legacy doesn't pass by assumption. It passes by intention. And for the first time, he'd come face to face with a reality where his last name wasn't enough. And the woman who opened the door wasn't there to protect me. She was there to protect everything I still believed in. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The kind of afternoon that feels like it doesn't belong to anyone. Gray sky, no breeze, the world caught between seasons. I sat in Richard's office, the same chair as before, the same clock ticking softly above the door. But something had changed. Not in the room. In me. The will was on the table. For pages. Crisp, clear, final. Richard slid it toward me slowly, his expression unreadable. "This is everything you asked for," he said. "Are you sure you want to go through with it?" I didn't answer right away. I ran my fingers across the edge of the paper, feeling the weight of what it represented. Not anger, not revenge, just choice. After a lifetime of bending for everyone else, I was finally standing still for myself. "I'm sure," I said. And I signed. The ink didn't shake. My hand didn't falter. There was no ceremony, no emotion. Just the quiet satisfaction of closing a door that had been creaking for far too long. The terms were simple. David and his sister were removed entirely. Not out of hate, out of clarity. They had made it clear where they stood. I was not their foundation. I was their inconvenience. And I would not fund that story any longer. Instead, I created something new. A fund. Quiet, structured, permanent. Dedicated to elders abandoned by their families. Men and women shuffled into facilities and left behind like furniture no one wants to take to the new house. The ones who stare at doorways waiting for visits that never come. I've met too many of them. In hospitals, in community centers, in quiet corners of the world that most people never bother to look into. They deserve better. I named it the Root Fund. Because we don't grow without what came before us. And too many forget that. Richard filed the documents. Clara would serve as trustee. Every detail had been checked twice. Every signature, every clause. There would be no loopholes, no appeals, no surprise reversals. When it was done, I reached into my coat pocket and handed Richard an envelope. "What's this?" he asked. "A letter," I said, "to be delivered when I'm gone." He nodded, tucked it into the drawer beside the will. That night, I made a copy for myself, sat at my desk in the gallery, and read the words one more time before folding them carefully. It wasn't long, just a page and a half, but every line mattered. To my children, if you're reading this, it means I've left. Maybe not in body, but in the only way that finally made you notice I was ever really there. I didn't do this to hurt you. I did this because I refused to be erased before I'm gone. You saw me as a burden, but I was the root beneath your comfort. I was the hands that fixed what broke, the voice that taught you how to speak, the presence that never asked for applause. You talk about legacy like it's a prize, but legacy is earned, and respect isn't inherited. It's given, or it's not. You made your choice, so I've made mine. My final gift isn't to you. It's to those who were left behind like I was, who still sit by windows hoping their name means something to someone. I don't leave with bitterness, only truth. I'm not a burden. I'm the root you forgot. When I sealed the letter, something in my chest loosened, like I'd been carrying a secret weight, and now it had finally been named. The gallery lights glowed soft above me. My last painting stood half-finished on the easel. A forest at dusk, roots exposed, branches stretching just out of frame. I dipped my brush into a shade of deep earth brown, not to cover anything, just to finish what I'd started. Outside, the world went on. Cars passed. Voices rose and faded. Somewhere, David was probably still pacing, trying to rewrite a version of the story where he was the victim. But I knew the truth. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt real. Not waiting. Not begging. Just free. Most mornings, I open the gallery before the sun finishes rising. I flip the lights on, brew a cup of coffee strong enough to wake a memory, and unlock the front door, even if no one's coming. There's a rhythm to it now. A pace. I don't rush anymore. The air here smells like wood and dust and fresh paint. Quiet things. Honest things. I keep the windows open most days. Let the breeze move through like a visitor I don't have to entertain. Some days, people stop in. Other days, it's just me and the silence. And that's more than enough. I've started signing my paintings again. Just my first name. Small, near the corner. Not to claim them, but to remind myself I was here. That I touched something. That I left something behind, even if no one ever hangs it on a wall. The 4 series is almost done. A dozen canvases, some dark, some golden, one in complete grayscale. I've called it Unseen Roots. I suppose it doesn't need explanation. The people who need to understand it usually do. Clara checks in weekly. The fund is growing. Applications are already coming in. Men and women in their 70s and 80s, quietly asking for help they should never have had to ask for. One woman, Joyce, wrote a letter so full of gratitude, I had to step outside to finish reading it. She ended it with, "I thought no one saw us anymore." They do now. I walk the town more often these days. People wave. The coffee shop knows my order. There's a kid who always points at my cane like it's a sword, and I play along. I started teaching a free sketch class on Saturdays. Nothing formal, just a few of us with easels and too much time. And in all this small, quiet life, I found something most people never stop long enough to look for. I found peace. Not the kind you chase with noise or applause. Not the kind people pretend to have on holiday cards or social media posts. But real peace. The kind that comes when you no longer need to be seen to feel alive. David never came back. Not really. He called once. A short voicemail. No apology. Just confusion. Hurt pride. He said he didn't understand why I'd cut him out. I never returned the call. Not because I'm angry, but because I'm done explaining myself to people who never bothered to ask who I was in the first place. Maybe one day, he'll sit in silence long enough to understand. Maybe not. That's not mine to carry anymore. I don't live with bitterness. I live with boundaries. And those two things are not the same. I've learned that walking away isn't weakness. Sometimes it's survival. Sometimes it's the only way to stop shrinking. To stop letting people write your story with pens you paid for. And no, this isn't a story of revenge. It's a story of remembering, of reclaiming, of standing still long enough to realize I never needed their permission to be whole. I've left behind more than money. I've left behind proof that a man can choose dignity over tradition, that a father doesn't owe his name to anyone who treats it like currency, that even in the final chapters, you can rewrite the ending. So if you're still listening, if you followed this story from the kitchen whispers to the silent will, I'll tell you the truth I wish someone had told me long ago. You are not what they forgot. You are not the version they created. You are not finished just because they stopped looking. You're still here. And so am I.